In the remote and unforgiving wilderness of the Canadian Rockies, where the jagged peaks pierced the sky like ancient fangs, stood the Shadow Peak Resort. Built in 1912 during the golden age of mountain tourism, the Grand Hotel had been a playground for the wealthy and the powerful for decades. Its massive stone and timber structure, with steeply pitched roofs designed to shed heavy snow, wide verandas offering panoramic views of snow-capped mountains, and an interior filled with polished oak paneling, crystal chandeliers, and Persian rugs, exuded an air of old-world elegance. Every summer and fall, guests flocked there for hiking, skiing, fine dining, and lavish parties in the Gold Room Ballroom. But when winter descended in earnest, usually by mid-November, the narrow, winding access road became completely impassable under drifts of snow that could reach 20 feet or more. The resort closed its doors to the public from November through April, leaving the vast building empty, silent, and brooding under a perpetual blanket of white. Only a caretaker and his family stayed behind each winter to maintain the boiler, perform minor repairs, keep the pipes from freezing, and ensure the structure survived the brutal isolation. It was a lonely, demanding job, one that required a special kind of resilience. In the winter of 1977, that responsibility fell to John Harlan and his family. John Harlan was 38 years old, a tall man with a once athletic build that had begun to soften around the edges. His dark hair was starting to show threads of gray at the temples, and his blue eyes, which had once sparkled with ambition, now carried the haunted look of a man who had tasted failure too many times. A former high school English teacher from Toronto, John had lost his last position after a violent outburst in the staff room, one fueled by alcohol, his longtime demon. He had been sober for 5 months when he applied for the Shadow Peak caretaker position, but the recovery was fragile. The half-finished manuscript of a play sat in his battered typewriter case, a project he believed could redeem him if only he had the time and solitude to finish it. The management company had been impressed by his references and his calm demeanor during the interview. They needed someone dependable. John swore he was that man. His wife, Laura, 30 years old, was a quiet, practical woman with ash-blonde hair usually pulled back in a simple ponytail. She had met John in college, drawn to his passion for literature and his big dreams. Life with him had been a roller coaster, periods of brilliance and warmth interrupted by drinking binges that left her bruised emotionally and sometimes physically. After their son was born, she had hoped fatherhood would anchor him. Now, facing another potential fresh start, she wanted desperately to believe this time would be different. The isolation at Shadow Peak terrified her, but the steady paycheck and the chance for John to write seemed worth the risk. Their son, Alex, was 5 years old, a small, pale boy with large, dark eyes that seemed far too knowing for his age. He spoke little but observed everything. For months he had been plagued by nightmares, vivid dreams of endless corridors, red velvet curtains dripping with something thick and dark, and a voice calling his name in a strange, echoing tone. He called the voice and the presence Tony. Tony lived in his mouth, Alex said, and sometimes showed him pictures of things that hadn't happened yet or secrets hidden in places. Laura dismissed it as an imaginary friend, a coping mechanism for the family's instability. John found it irritating, a sign of weakness. They drove up the mountain in a battered station wagon loaded with suitcases, boxes of books, Alex's toys, and enough winter clothing to last 6 months. The last supply truck had departed the day before, leaving the resort fully stocked with canned goods, frozen meat in the walk-in freezers, and firewood stacked high. As they climbed higher, the air grew thinner and colder. Pine trees gave way to barren rock and snow. When they finally pulled up to the main entrance, the Shadow Peak Resort loomed over them, its windows dark and reflective like watchful eyes. The outgoing caretaker, An elderly man named Grady, with a weathered face and nervous hands, met them in the vast lobby. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, catching the weak afternoon light and scattering it across the deep red carpets. A massive stone fireplace dominated the far wall, big enough to roast an entire deer. Twin grand staircases swept upward on either side, leading to the guest floors. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant, steady hum of the boiler deep in the basement. Grady gave them a quick but thorough tour, his voice echoing through the empty halls. He showed John the boiler room in the subbasement, a cavernous space filled with pipes, gauges, and the massive furnace that kept the building from freezing solid. "Keep the pressure steady at 60 pounds, Grady warned. "She drops below 50 and the pipes start bursting. Check her twice a day." He pointed out the tool shed, the radio room for emergency calls, the storage areas stocked with enough food for an army, and the areas prone to leaks on the upper floors. As they walked the long, carpeted corridors lined with closed doors numbered in brass, Grady mentioned the hotel's history casually. Built in 1912, hosted presidents, movie stars, even some gangsters in the 20s. Place has seen its share of incidents. A suicide in room 237 back in the 30s, I think. But it's just a building. Long as you respect her, she'll be fine. Alex trailed behind, his small hand in Laura's. He stared at the walls as if listening to something only he could hear. In one hallway on the second floor, he stopped suddenly, eyes widening. Tony was showing him something. A flash of two little girls in blue dresses standing hand in hand, smiling. "Come play with us," they whispered in his mind. "Forever and ever." He squeezed his mother's hand tighter but said nothing. That first night, after Grady had driven away in his snowcat and the road was officially closed for winter, the Harlans ate a simple meal of canned chili and bread in the enormous dining room. Candles flickered on the tables, throwing long shadows across the walls. John raised a glass of water. "To new beginnings," he said with forced cheer. 6 months of peace, fresh air, and time for me to finish the play. We'll come down from this mountain better than we went up." Laura smiled and nodded, but her eyes flicked to Alex, who was staring at the empty bandstand at the far end of the room as if he could see musicians there. The first 2 weeks passed in a fragile calm. During the day, sunlight sparkled on the fresh snow, and the family explored. Alex discovered the hedge maze behind the resort, a vast, living labyrinth of trimmed evergreen bushes that, in summer, was a tourist attraction shaped into animals and geometric patterns. Now, in winter, it stood skeletal under a layer of snow, its narrow paths inviting yet somehow ominous, like veins leading into the heart of the mountain. John set up his typewriter in the manager's office on the first floor, a wood-paneled room with a large desk overlooking the frozen tennis courts and the snow-covered golf course. The words came slowly at first, but he was writing. Laura cooked hearty meals, read dog-eared paperbacks from the resort's extensive library, and tried to create a sense of normalcy, playing games with Alex, teaching him simple lessons at the dining table. But the hotel was never truly empty or silent. At night, especially after the sun disappeared behind the peaks, strange sounds began. John would wake to the faint strains of big band music, trumpets and saxophones playing swing tunes from the 1940s, drifting up from the Gold Room ballroom on the ground floor. Laughter, the clink of glasses, the murmur of conversations. Heart pounding, he would creep downstairs in his robe, only to find the ballroom dark and locked, the bar covered with a heavy steel grate, the chairs stacked neatly on tables. He blamed the wind howling through the old ventilation system or the building settling under the weight of snow. "Old places make noise," he told Laura. "It's nothing." Alex's episodes grew more frequent. He would stand motionless in the middle of a hallway, eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, lips moving silently as Tony spoke to him. One afternoon, while his parents were unpacking, Alex wandered alone to the second floor. Room 237's door was slightly ajar. Compelled by an invisible force, he pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was luxurious, with heavy red drapes, a king-sized bed, and an elegant bathroom. In the deep bathtub filled with steaming water, a beautiful naked woman with pale skin and red lips smiled at him seductively. "Come here, sweetie," she whispered, her voice husky. "I'll give you a big hug." Alex approached, drawn despite the fear. When he touched her shoulder, her skin felt cold and bloated, like something long dead. Bruises appeared around her neck and upper thighs. The water turned murky. He screamed and ran, slamming the door behind him. Later, when Laura found him trembling in their suite on the third floor, Alex only whispered, "Tony told me not to go in 237. The lady is still dead. She wanted to hug me forever." John dismissed it as a nightmare or Alex's overactive imagination. "Stop coddling him, Laura," he snapped one evening over dinner. "The boys got to toughen up out here." Tension was creeping in. The snow fell heavier each day, blanketing the world in silence. The radio in the office crackled with static more often than not, cutting them off from the outside world. John began to feel the pressure, the isolation, the responsibility for the massive building, the weight of his unfinished play. Late one night, after Laura and Alex were asleep, he found himself in the gold room. The grate was open. Bottles of aged whiskey gleamed behind the polished bar. Just one drink, he told himself. To steady his nerves, he poured a double, then another. The whiskey burned pleasantly. For the first time in months, he felt warm and in control. The whiskey tasted like coming home. John Harlan sat alone at the long mahogany bar of the gold room, the lights somehow on although he had no memory of flipping any switches. Golden glow bathed the room in warmth, reflecting off rows of crystal glasses and polished bottles that had been locked away only hours earlier. Behind the bar stood a bartender in a crisp white jacket, his face smooth and pleasant, hair neatly parted. The name tag read Lloyd. "Evening, Mr. Harlan," Lloyd said, as if they had known each other for years. "The usual?" John blinked. I shouldn't." Lloyd smiled understandingly and poured 2 fingers of aged Canadian rye into a heavy tumbler, sliding it across the bar with practiced grace. "The hotel understands. A man under pressure needs a little relief. You've been carrying a lot, John. The writing, the family, the responsibility of this place. One drink never hurt anyone who knows his limits." John drank. The burn was perfect. The second glass followed, then a third. For the first time in months, the constant knot of anxiety in his chest loosened. He talked about the failed teaching jobs, the way colleagues had looked at him after the incident, the way Laura's eyes had grown disappointed, the way Alex sometimes stared at him as if he were already a ghost. Lloyd listened without judgment, refilling the glass at exactly the right moments. "You're a good man, Mr. Harlan," Lloyd said softly. "The hotel sees that. It rewards those who belong here. Stay with us. We take care of our own." When John finally stumbled back to the third-floor suite, it was past 3 in the morning. Laura was awake, sitting up in bed with a book. She smelled the liquor on him immediately. "John, you promised." "It was just one," he lied, his voice already thickening with the familiar defensive anger. "Don't start nagging. I have everything under control." But control was slipping away faster than snow through fingers. By mid-December, the snow had become a living wall. Blizzards howled for days, cutting off even the emergency radio. The corridors of Shadow Peak seemed to lengthen and twist. Alex's tricycle, brought from the city, made a soft, rhythmic sound as he pedaled endlessly along the hallways. Red rum, red rum, red rum. He would stop suddenly, press his hands to the wallpaper, and whisper things only he could hear. Tony showed him more and more. One evening Alex stood outside room 237 again. The door was wide open this time. Inside, the woman waited, naked, beautiful, rotting. She beckoned with wet arms. When Laura found Alex later, he was curled in a ball, nose bleeding, muttering about the lady who wanted him to stay dead with her forever. Laura marched straight to John, who was typing furiously in the manager's office, empty glass beside him. "He needs to see a doctor. We have to get him off this mountain." John's eyes were bloodshot. "There is no doctor. The road is closed. We're staying. The hotel is good for him. It's teaching him things." That night John saw the twins for the first time. Two identical girls, about 8 years old, in matching blue dresses with white collars, standing hand in hand at the end of a corridor. They smiled at him with identical cold smiles. "Come play with us, Daddy," they said in unison. "Forever and ever and ever." When he blinked, they were gone, but bloody handprints remained on the wall. John's drinking grew heavier. He found more bottles hidden in the basement storage rooms. Excellent scotch, cognac, rare bourbons left by wealthy guests decades earlier. The hotel seemed to replenish them. He stopped shaving. His once handsome face became puffy and red-veined. He spoke less to Laura and more to the empty air, muttering about corrections that needed to be made. Laura grew terrified. She began planning their escape in secret. In the kitchen, she packed a large sled with blankets, canned food, a first aid kit, flashlights, and extra batteries. She studied maps of the mountain trails, marking possible routes down to the ranger station 30 miles away. Alex helped her silently, his dark eyes full of understanding beyond his years. Using his shining, he showed her flashes of what was coming. John chasing them through snow, the roquet mallet raised high, his face no longer human. One bitter afternoon in late January, Laura confronted John in the boiler room. He was drunk, adjusting valves with shaking hands. The pressure gauge hovered dangerously low. "We're leaving tomorrow," she said firmly. "Alex and I. You can stay if you want, but we're going." John turned slowly. His eyes were flat and cold. "No one leaves the hotel. Not when it needs us. I have work to do here. Important work. The hotel has given me purpose again." He raised his hand and slapped her hard across the face. Laura staggered back, lips splitting. Alex, hiding behind a pipe, watched with silent horror. That night Laura locked their bedroom door. John pounded on it for an hour, screaming obscenities that echoed through the empty halls. Then the pounding stopped. Silence fell, more frightening than the rage. Alex woke his mother at 4 a.m. "Tony says now. We have to go now." They crept downstairs with the packed sled. The lobby was freezing. The boiler had been left untended. As they reached the main doors, a figure stepped out of the shadows near the grand staircase. John. In one hand he held the heavy wooden roquet mallet from the equipment shed, its head stained with something dark. "You ungrateful bitches," he said quietly, voice calm and reasonable. "After everything the hotel has done for us, after it forgave me my failures, you think you can just leave?" Laura pushed Alex behind her. "John, please, this isn't you. It's more me than I've ever been." He smiled. "The hotel showed me the truth. Weakness must be corrected. A man has duties." He swung the mallet. Laura dodged, the heavy head smashing into the oak reception desk and splintering it. She grabbed Alex's hand and they ran. Through the dining room, past the gold room where ghostly laughter and music swelled louder than ever, down service corridors into the kitchen. John followed at a measured pace, singing in a drunken, off-key voice, "Here's Johnny! Come out and play!" They barricaded themselves in the walk-in pantry. For hours they listened to him outside, banging the mallet rhythmically against pipes, laughing, talking to Lloyd and Grady and other voices that were not his own. He recounted stories of previous caretakers who had done what was necessary. He described how one had killed his family with an axe in 1921 and how the hotel had embraced him ever after. Using a loose ventilation grate, Laura and Alex eventually escaped into the service tunnels beneath the hotel. Alex's shining guided them through the dark maze of pipes and wiring. They emerged near the rear loading dock, dragging the sled into the bitter night. The wind screamed across the frozen landscape. Snow stung their exposed skin like needles. Behind them, lights flickered on and off throughout the resort as if the building itself were alive and angry. John burst out after them, coat flapping open, mallet raised. "Laura! Alex! Daddy's coming!" The chase moved into the hedge maze. The high snow walls formed narrow corridors that seemed to shift and change. Alex, using Tony's guidance, led his mother deeper, turning left and right in patterns only he could see. John's voice echoed all around them, sometimes in front, sometimes behind. "I'll bash your brains in. I'll make you both shine for the hotel forever." Laura had taken an old fire axe from the tool shed earlier. Her arms ached from dragging the sled, but adrenaline kept her moving. When John finally cornered them in the center of the maze, a small open space surrounded by towering green and white walls, she was ready. He lunged at Alex first. Mallet swinging in a deadly arc, Laura screamed and brought the axe down with all her strength. The blade bit into John's shoulder. Blood sprayed across the snow, freezing instantly into crimson crystals. He roared in pain but kept coming, eyes wild with the hotel's ancient hunger. "You can't kill what's already part of it," he bellowed. She swung again, catching him in the side. He staggered but still advanced, swinging wildly. The mallet grazed Alex's arm, tearing his coat. Laura's third blow landed on his head with a sickening crack. John dropped to his knees in the blood-stained snow, still smiling that terrible, triumphant grin. "The hotel will remember me," he whispered, breath fogging. "I'm home now, forever and ever and ever." He collapsed face down. Snow began to cover him almost immediately. Laura and Alex stumbled back to the resort, nearly frozen. They collapsed in the lobby beside the dying fireplace, huddling together under blankets. The building seemed to breathe around them, pipes clanking like distant applause, floorboards creaking with unseen footsteps, faint big band music drifting from the gold room. Alex's nose bled again as Tony showed him final visions. John's frozen body smiling in the maze, future guests arriving, the hotel waiting patiently for its next willing victim. Days passed in a haze of cold and shock. Laura managed to light a large signal fire on the roof using furniture and kerosene. When rescue helicopters finally fought through the storm and spotted the flames 3 days later, they found a half-frozen woman and a silent, traumatized boy clinging to each other. The official report, filed weeks later, called it a tragic case of extreme cabin fever, alcohol poisoning, and exposure. John Harlan's body was recovered from the maze, frozen solid, one hand still locked around the Roque mallet. The Shadow Peak Resort reopened the following June under new management. Guests raved about the stunning views, the luxurious rooms, and the attentive, if sometimes oddly watchful, staff. A few sensitive visitors complained of nightmares or the feeling of being observed from upper floors, but these were dismissed as altitude effects. Alex never mentioned Tony again after they returned to Toronto. He grew into a quiet, artistic young man who avoided mountains. But sometimes, late at night in his city apartment, he would wake to the distant sound of swing music, clinking glasses, and a child's voice whispering his name down endless corridors. The hotel remembered the Harlans, and high in the Canadian Rockies, Shadow Peak Resort still stands, empty each winter, waiting, always hungry for new caretakers who believe they can tame its long, cold memory.